Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today is day 6 of our 90-day SAT preparation series. So the last 5 days we took you through the SAT math equations that you need to know. And now we're going to go ahead and start getting into practice problems and my tips, tricks, and strategies for the SAT math section based on actual practice tests. So this is SAT practice test 1 from the College Board. So I'll be taking you through questions 1 through 8 on the math no calculator section, and then questions 1 through 8 on the math with calculator section today. So as I go through, make sure to have your notebook and your workbook out. So put the work for each problem in the workbook and then take notes on what I tell you to take notes on in the notebook. So as I see each question, I'm going to go ahead and give you my tips and tricks if I see any. So any setups or patterns that I see, I'll tell you to put those in your notebooks. Anything strategy-wise, I'll tell you to put in the notebook. Everything else, put in the workbook. So let's go ahead and get started with the math no calculator section. This will be question 1. If x minus 1 divided by 3 equals k and k equals 3, what is the value of x? Alright, well if I know that k is equal to 3, then I can go ahead and plug in 3 for k. Now one thing to note, and this is going to be something you're going to need to put in your notebook, is on the SAT math section, always pay attention to what is asked last. So what is the last part of the question? What do you have to answer with? So right here it says what is the value of x, but it could also say what is the value of 2x plus 3, in which case I have to solve for x and then plug it into this equation and then have my answer be whatever 2x plus 3 equals. Now, in this situation where it has what is the value of 2x plus 3, if it were to say that, a lot of times the answer to what the value of x is would be an answer choice, but it would be wrong because you're asked for what the value of 2x plus 3 is. So make sure that you put down in your notes to pay attention to what is asked at the end of the SAT math question. So make sure you put down to answer what you're asked. So always pay attention to that last part of that math question. Alright, so now we can go ahead and start solving our equations. We have x minus 1 divided by 3 equals 3, since k equals 3. We're asked for the value of x, which means we need to get x alone. So we multiply each side by 3 to get rid of our denominator. So 3 times 3 is going to give us 9. So we're going to have 9 is equal to x minus 1. We're going to go ahead and add 1 to each side to get x equals a number. We add 1 to each side. We have 9 plus 1. That gives us 10, which tells us that x is going to equal 10. So D will be our answer for number 1. Alright, number 2, for I equals root negative 1, what is the sum 7 plus 3i plus negative 8 plus 9i? So right here, if I were approaching this problem, I know that I don't need to deal with I squared because I see all my answer choices have I anyways, and I also know that because I'm asked for what the sum of 7 plus 3i and negative 8 plus 9i is, right? So all I need to do here is I need to combine my terms because this is addition, right? So I see I have 3i and I see I have 9i. So I'm going to combine those to get 12i. Then I see I have a negative 8. Keep in mind this is addition. If it were subtraction, I would have to pay attention to this sign and apply it here and here, but it isn't. It's addition, so I don't need to do that. So I can go ahead and erase that part and that part. So now I have 7 minus 8, since it's plus negative 8. That's the same as 7 minus 8. That's going to give me negative 1. So my answer will be negative 1 plus 12i. So my answer will be A. So what to put down in your notes there? Here's what I would recommend putting in your notes. I would recommend putting down that if you're asked to combine terms like you are here for the sum, not rewriting the whole equation. So don't rewrite 7 plus 3i plus negative 8 plus 9i. Instead, do what I did. Draw these little arrows down of your like terms and combine them like that, because that's going to save you time from not having to rewrite the equation. So that's the tip for question number 2 on what you should be doing there. All right, question number 3. On Saturday afternoon, so this is for word problems. So I'm going to go ahead and give you my tips for word problems. Make sure you put these in your notes. You need to be underlining rates in word problems, any numbers in word problems, any units of time in word problems, and any units of measurement in word problems. So make sure you put that in the notebook. So write down for word problems, underline rates, any numbers, any units of time, and any units of measurement that are in the word problem. So I'll show you what I mean by that. We have on Saturday afternoon. That part isn't important. We have Armand sent M text messages. That's a rate. He sent M text messages per hour for 5 hours. So those are 2 pieces of key information. I'm going to underline both of those. So we have 5 text messages he sent, 5 hours he sent text messages at a rate M. So his total is 5M. Then I have Tyrone sent P text messages each hour, so that's Tyrone's rate, for 4 hours. Right, so he did 4 hours at a rate of P text messages each hour. Which of the following represents the total number of messages sent by Armand and Tyrone on Saturday afternoon? That's the other thing I missed. Put this in your notebook as well. Underline what the question is asking you to answer, right? So underline that part of the word problem as well. So that's going to be that final part of that, all of this whole section of wording is going to be what it wants you to answer with. So make sure you're always underlining that as well. Just like you did over here with what is the value of x, make sure we pay attention to what we're asked to answer with. So we need the total number of text messages sent by Armand and Tyrone. Well, that's just going to be 5m plus 4p because Tyrone sent p text messages each hour for 4 hours. His total will be 4p. And then Armand sent m text messages each hour for 5 hours, so his total will be 5m. So another trick that you can use if you struggle with word problems like these is think about canceling units. So we have m text messages per hour, so I'm going to write txt for text messages. Right, that's our rate per hour. So hour is going to be represented by h. So if Armand is sending 5 text messages per hour, and he does that for 5 hours, right, so multiply by 5 hours. Well, our h's we see cancel, right? So then we're going to have that 5 times however many text messages. So we see our final units then. Our final units are text messages. So if you're ever struggling to figure out what you need to do to an equation, one thing that can help is canceling out units, right? So then you would see that you have to have 5 times m for your total number of text messages, right? So that's one way that you can use units to help you find out how to find the right answer if you need help doing that. So your answer here is going to be C, because that's 5m plus 4p. All right, question 4. We got another word problem. So once again, I'm going to go through, show you what I would underline, what I think is important. So Kathy is a repair technician for a phone company. I find that to be unimportant. Each week, okay, that's a unit of time, I'm going to underline it. She receives a batch of phones that needs repairs. That's unimportant. The number of phones she has left to fix. Okay, now we're getting into important information. The number of phones she has left to fix at the end of each day can be estimated with the equation. We always underline equations as well. Put that in your notebook to underline equations in word problems. It can be estimated with the equation p equals 108 minus 23d, where p is the number of phones left. So make sure you put this in your notebook as well, that you need to underline any variables and what they mean. So put that in the notebook. Say for word problems, I need to underline variables and what they mean. So p is the number of phones left. And d is the number of days she has worked that week. So that week is a unit of time. I need to underline that as well. Next, I need to underline what my question is asking me to answer with. So what is the meaning of the value of 108 in this equation? So when I'm asked for what the meaning of certain values in an equation is, one thing I'm going to pay attention to is if it's a simple slope-intercept equation, which I see that p equals 108 minus 23d. That is a slope-intercept equation. So why is it a slope-intercept equation? Well, you may not think it is, just by looking at it, because you see you don't have mx as your first term. But this could just be rewritten as p equals negative 23d plus 108, right? And in that case, you have your standard slope-intercept, right? Well, if I'm asked for the value of 108, I see that's my y-intercept. Because if d is 0, then p is equal to 108. And in that case, we know that p is the number of phones left, so there has to be 108 phones left to fix when she works 0 days. So that's how many she's starting each week with. Therefore, our answer has to be B. Now, let's say that we were going through our answer choices. We see A as Kathy will complete the repairs within 108 days. Well, that's not true. We have C, Kathy repairs phones at a rate of 108 per hour. No, our rate is in days, first of all, so that's an issue with C. Also, it's negative 23D, so she's completing repairs at 23 per day, not 108 per day, so that can get rid of D as well. All right, moving on to question 5. All right, so I see that I have my equation up here. I see that I have subtraction sign, and I'm asked for what's equivalent to that equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm applying the subtraction to all of these terms, right? But I'm going to show you what I do to make this go by very quickly. Is I'm going to find my like terms. So I've got x squared y here, and I've got x squared y here. So I'm going to do x squared y. Then I have this minus sign times a minus sign, so that's going to give me plus. So I have now plus x squared y. I'm going to find what that equals. That equals 2x squared y. I'm going to get rid of any answer choices that don't have that. So put this in your notebook. Put down, get rid of wrong answer choices as soon as I can. So put down that you need to get rid of wrong answer choices as soon as you can on the SAT math section. And I'm going to show you why that's important right here. So now that I've gotten rid of A and B, I'm left with C and D. So looking at C and D, what can I do? Well, this middle term here, it's different, and this y term is different. Now, a lot of times this middle term here will be the same, so you'd have the same coefficient in front of xy squared, or the same number in front of xy squared. Now, in that case, I would look to my y squared only. I wouldn't even bother with my xy squared because it isn't going to help me because they're the same. Now, in this case, they're not, so it doesn't matter if we pick to work with y squared or with xy squared first. But if those two were the same, I would go ahead and look to my y squared in order to find the answer between C and D. But in this case, it doesn't matter, so we'll just go with xy squared, because why not? All right, so we've got a positive 5x squared y, or I'm sorry, a positive 5x y squared, and then we have a minus 3, because this is a minus sign right here, a minus 3xy squared, minus 3xy squared. So when we do that, we have 5 minus 3. It's going to leave us with 2xy squared. 2xy squared. So we know that our answer then has to be C. We can get rid of D. All right, so go ahead and put down in your notes what I was saying about getting rid of wrong answer choices as fast as possible, and then add something saying basically do the least work possible. So if these middle terms were the same, this 2xy squared, say this bottom one was 2xy squared as well, then you wouldn't even bother doing that. You would jump straight to the y squared to determine which answer is incorrect and which one's correct. So put something along those lines in your notes as well. All right, question 6. So you've got h equals 3a plus 28.6 as your equation. So one thing that you should know is if you're given an equation up here, one thing that I do is I check my end part first, sometimes, not always, but sometimes. If I see my end part says something like, I'll go ahead and show you in number 7, which of the following gives P in terms of M, R, and N, then I'm not going to read what my word problem actually says. Because if it says which of the following gives P in terms of M, R, and N, I don't need to know what the variables mean, I just have to rearrange them. So I always check if I have a lot of word in here, I'm going to quick check my end and see if I see which of the following shows right. And another thing you can do is you can just look at the answer choice. If it's something like this, where all of your first term is the same and it's set equal to something, then it's probably going to be like that. I see here that doesn't apply, so I wouldn't even necessarily have to read this last part because I would just kind of glance at the answer choices and see that. But that's just one thing, and I'll explain more about that in 7. But all right, so for number 6, I'm going to show you what I underline in this word problem to give you more practice with that. So we've got a pediatrician uses the model above to estimate the height h. Okay, that's the variable. I'm going to underline that. Of a boy in inches. So that's a measurement. I'm going to underline that. In terms of the boy's age, right? That's a time or a duration. I'm going to underline that. So his age is A in years. Between the ages 2 and 5, also a time. I'm going to underline that. Based on the model, what is the estimated increase? So now we're getting into what I need to answer with. In inches of a boy's height each year. All right, so I need to find his increase in height each year. Well, we know that A is his age, so if he increases by 1 age or 1 year, his height then is going to go up by 3. All right, so that'd be plus 3. So you know that our answer there will be A. So nothing really new for your notes there, except for what I was saying with 7, which I'm going to get more into now as well. All right, so 7, here's what I see. We've got this equation here. Anytime I have an equation put above a word problem, I quick glance at my answer choices or at the end, either one, whichever you prefer, and I check if it's just one where I have to manipulate variables. I see that this one is because it says which of the following gives P in terms of M, R, and N. That means I don't need to know what they represent. I just have to be able to move them around. So put that in your notes that if you see all your answer choices look like this, one variable equal sign, and then the other variables are manipulated in different ways, go ahead and write down that you don't necessarily need to read what the word problem actually says, you just have to manipulate the equation. All right, so let's say I see this big, scary equation here, right? You may be thinking, oh my goodness, I have to deal with all these exponents, all these fractions, this is going to be terrible. Well, no, this is actually going to be a very, very easy problem, and I'm going to show you why with a little trick. So when I see this, here's what I see. If you were going to simplify this down, you could just write it as m equals 1/2 p, right? And p equals 1/2, and p equals 2/1m, right? So here's what basically I'm trying to say here. Let's just think about this as a term and this as a term for a minute, right? We're asked for p in terms of m, r, and n, so we just need to get this p set equal to something. Well, to do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to like we do over here, we multiply by what our denominator is, right? So we'd multiply by 2, and then we would multiply by 2 over here, and that would just be 2 over 1. So we see that we just flipped that, right? So we see that P is equal to 2 over 1m, and we see that m is equal to 1/2 P. So you see how we just have reciprocals there? They just flip the term on the other side. That's all we need to do with this equation here. We just bring what's in our denominator up here, bring what's in our numerator down here, put that little dividing line there, and that'll be our answer. So all I got to do is look for which one has my denominator as my numerator now. So I find that, I see that that's answer choice B. B is going to be my correct answer. All right? So make sure that you have this in your notes, this relationship right here, right? Between, you can pick X, Y, M, and P, it doesn't matter the variable, but just make sure you understand that. So that way you don't have to go through all this exponents and all that, you can just move your equations over. So now let's think about number 7, right? How much time did I just save you by teaching that? I'm going to show you how incredible it is that if you recognize what I'm showing you, how much time you can save, right? So let's say I get to number 7, I look at it, boom, I see an equation up top. Well, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to check my answer choices or my question. I look at my answer choices, they're all P is set equal to a number. If P is all set equal to a number, I see which of the following gives P in terms of M, R, and N. I just got to manipulate P. Well, boom, once again, I look up here, I see my fraction. If I need to isolate P, move this to the numerator, move this to the denominator, boom, boom. Which one has -1 up top? This one does. B is my answer. See how much faster that is? If you can recognize those things, you can just move so much quicker on the SAT math section. All right, so now we've got question 8. So what I see whenever I see two variables set equal to a number, what I'm going to try to do is just go ahead and label what they equal, right? So right here I've got a over b equals 2. That tells me a is 2, and that tells me b is going to equal 1 because 2 over 1 is 2. So now I'm asked for the value of 4b over a. So now I just plug them in. So I know that b is equal to 1. So I've got 4 times 1, which is 4. And I know that a is 2, which means I have 4 over 2. 4 over 2 is equal to 2. So my answer there is going to be C. So that's 1 through 8 on the math, no calculator section. Now we're going to switch to 1 through 8 on the math with calculator section. And we'll probably take about 35 or 40 minutes on the SAT math section today. And we'll spend a little bit less time on the writing section today. So let's go ahead and get into the SAT math with calculator section for practice test 1. All right, let's get into the math with calculator section now. So we've got question 1. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the math no calculator section. I'll take you through, tell you what to put in your notes, and then everything else just goes in the workbook. So I'll give you my strategies for each question and tips as well. All right, so tip right here, I see I have a graph. We haven't done a graph yet, so I'm actually going to go ahead and give you my tips for graphs as well. So this will go in your notes. So for graphs, big tips here are going to be make sure you understand what your axis labels are. So look at what your axes are. Make sure you look at the scale of your axes because it could be a broken scale, right, where it's not all the same. So make sure you pay attention to the scale of your axes. Make sure you pay attention to units, right, beats per minute, minutes. So you're paying attention to what your axes mean, what units they are, and if it's a broken scale or how much it's going up by or down by per each unit, right? So that's the big things for graphs. Also, if there's a title of the graph, make sure you look at that because that can make sure that you don't make a simple mistake in misinterpreting the graph as well. So if there's a title, look at that as well. All right, so we've got John runs at different speeds as part of his training program. The graph shows his target heart rate at different times during his workout. On which interval is the target heart rate strictly increasing? Okay, when you have words like increasing, decreasing, or remains the same, and there's a graph there, that's really what you're looking at. Also transition words, so things such as then or next, pay attention to those. So we're looking for the interval where his target heart rate, so that's going to be our y-axis, is strictly increasing, then strictly decreasing. So that means we can't have constants. So we see we have a constant here, here, and here. Those can't be our answer. Our answer has to be from 40 to 60 minutes. So that's going to be answer choice B. All right, question 2. So what you should have in your notes there was what I was saying about make sure with graphing questions that you're underlining or circling words that such as increasing, decreasing, or remaining the same, right? Always making sure we're paying attention to what is the question asked to us, right? So that's going to be at the end of that paragraph. Make sure you're paying attention to your axes and your units as well. All right, question 2. If y equals kx where k is a constant, so we've got an equation here, k is a constant, y equals 24 when x equals 6. What's the value of y when x equals 5? So we got to make sure we understand what we're asked to answer, and that is for the value of y when x equals 5. So to do that, we see that y is 24 when x is 6, so we plug that in, so k times 6. So now what we're going to do is we're going to solve for k by dividing each side by 6. We do that there. 24 over 6 is going to give us 4 equals k. So now that we have k, we have to multiply k by 5 because y equals kx. It's bad x there. Y equals kx. So if we're solving for y when x equals 5, we have to do y is equal to k, which is 4, times x, which is 5, and that will give us 20, which is going to be our answer. So that'll be C. All right, so for that one, it's really just algebra. There's not really any big tips there other than just making sure that we're paying attention to what we're asked at the end of our question. That's really the big thing with number 2 that you need to know to get it right. So just making sure you got the simple algebra down and then implementing that. All right, question 3. In the figure above, lines L and M are parallel and lines S and T are parallel. If the measure of angle 1 is 35 degrees, what is the measure of angle 2? All right, so if I need the measure of angle 2, what I'm going to look to do is I see it's right here. I'm going to look to form this 180 degree angle here, and since I know what 1 is, I'll do 180 degrees minus 180 degrees minus our angle 1. Right, and I'll show you how I get there. So this angle 1 here, it's going to be the same as this angle here, which is going to be the same as this angle here. So then what I do is I know that angle 1 and angle 2 are going to equal 180 degrees because they are along this line here, right? This line M. So now that I know that they're going to equal 180 degrees, I will go ahead and subtract this angle 1 from each side to give me 180 minus angle 1 equals angle 2. We know angle 1 is 35 degrees, so that means that angle 2 then is going to have to equal 145 degrees. So our answer there is going to be D. So with questions like this where you're given something like this and you're dealing with angles, make sure that you understand your corresponding angles. So corresponding angles are angles like 1 and this angle here, and then that angle and this angle here. We know that angle 2 corresponds to this angle here, and this angle here, and this angle here. All right, so 1s are going to be all right here. Your 2s are going to be where I just put 2s. Also 1s are going to be right here. Also 2s will be here. All right, so make sure that you can fill those out for those graphs or those plots of lines. So nothing really crazy there, not really much tricks there other than just understanding measurements and how to get to them. So, all right, question 4. You got 16 plus 4x, or did I circle my answer there? I did, okay. All right, if 16 plus 4x is 10 more than 14, what is the value of 8x? All right, so if we have a word problem right here with this if statement, we're going to start with focusing on this, and we're going to just kind of shed off this what is the value of 8x. Keep in mind, not ask for the value of x, it's 8x this time. So that's that trick I was talking about. I bet it's quite possible that I almost guarantee that x is an answer choice without even doing this yet. So we've got 16 plus 4x. It says that that's 10 more than 14, right? So that much minus 10 is going to equal 14, right? Because it's 10 more than 14. All right, so what is the value of 8x? Well, we got to solve for x. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do that 16 minus 10. That's going to simplify it out to 4x plus 6 equals 14. I'm going to subtract 6 from each side. Subtract 6 from each side. When I do that, I get an 8 here is equal to 4x. Divide each side by 4, and I get that x is going to equal 2. All right, so now look at that. Look at A. A is 2. Is that the correct answer? No, it is not, because we're asked for the value of 8x. So that's exactly what I was saying, right? So we should be doing 8 times 2 since 2 is x, and that gives us our final answer of 16, right? That's exactly what I'm saying. With this paying attention to what the question's asking, that's very, very important, okay? All right, so make sure you pay attention to what the question's asking because otherwise you will get it wrong. All right, so that's the big thing you need to put in your notes. Once again, paying attention to the end of that question. Another thing, if you have a situation where you have if 16 plus 4x is 10 more than 14 or anything like that, make sure that you're writing out your work, paying attention to only that part of the question, because what's over here is going to be a separate equation than what this if statement is. So if statements are important. Make sure you pay attention to those. All right, now we've got our question 5. So question 5 is a statistics question. Which of the following graphs best shows a strong negative association between D and T? All right, so a strong association, I'm going to show you what that is real quick. So let's do a strong positive association. So I'm going to show you negative associations, positive associations, and strong and weak. So put this in your notes as well. And I'll just go ahead and use their examples as well, just because I don't feel like making my own. All right, so this right here is called a weak negative. All right, so that right there would be a weak negative association is what A would be. So A is wrong because it's not strong. It is negative. A negative association means that as X increases, Y decreases. So it looks like that. But A is wrong because it's not strong. It's weak because all of these are scattered over more, right? They're not really all together. A strong association means that all of your plots are more together. B is not negative or positive really. We see it's just kind of a flat line across, so that is going to be incorrect. There would be no association there. All right, C would be a strong positive is what that would be considered because it's strong, all those dots are close together, but it's positive association because as X increases, Y increases. So I'll write positive and strong, STR for strong. This one's got no correlation. And then we've got D. D is our strong negative association. We see that Y decreases as X increases and that all of our plots are strong together. So D is our answer there. So this is going to be negative and strong. So go ahead and put that as strong. A strong association has its plots very much together, and a weak association has its plots much more apart, and a negative association is where Y goes down as X goes up, and a positive association means Y increases as X increases. So that's what should go in your notes there. All right, question 6. So we have a table up here. We always want to make sure that we're paying attention to tables. So if we have a table up here, then we're not really going to be able to use our trick where we just go down to the end and see if we have to manipulate variables, because we're not going to be able to do that in a table. We actually have to understand it. So with the table, we're just going to go ahead and read through it, make sure we underline what we need to for a word problem. So we've got a hospital stores one type of medicine in 2 decagram containers. So that's a number. We're going to pay attention to that. Based on the information given in the box above, how many 1 milligram doses are there in a 1 2 decagram container? All right, so 1 milligram per dose. So we just need to know the number of milligrams that are in a 1 2 decagram container. Well, if we have 2 decagrams, we know 1 decagram is equal to 10 grams. So if we had 2, then we have 20 grams. So we got 20 grams. Get rid of that. We've got 20 grams. Now we know that 1 gram is equal to 1,000 milligrams. But if we have 20 of them, then we can switch our 1 out for a 20, and we have 20,000. So we see we have 20,000 milligrams. We know that 1 milligram is 1 dose. Therefore, we will have 20,000 doses. So our answer there will be D. All right, next up we got question 7. Or I'll go ahead and make sure that we've got all of our tips for our notes for number 6 real quick. I believe that for number 6, really, there's no big tricks there. I would just say make sure with a table, if you don't need to rewrite things from the table, don't rewrite them because you can save time. So anytime that there's stuff you can just kind of cross out and put above to avoid rewriting and wasting time doing that, I would recommend doing that. So you can put that in your notes if you want. Don't feel like you have to if you just remember it from practice, but go ahead and do that if you would like. And we'll move on to number 7. All right, number 7, we see that we have a bar graph. So with bar graphs, it's very important that we pay attention to our axes, right? So what's our axes over here? Well, it's unlabeled, which means we're probably going to have to answer it because otherwise they probably would label it because you need to for a graph. All right, so that jumps out to me. We want to pay attention to our titles as well. We've got rooftop solar panel installations in 5 cities. We've got cities A, B, C, D, and E are 5 cities. So we've got the number of rooftops with solar panel installations in 5 cities is shown in the graph above. If the total number is 27,500, what is an appropriate label for the vertical axis of the graph? So like I said, we're labeling axis here. All right, well, if we need 27,500 as our total number of installations, the first thing I'm looking at is my biggest number, because anything that is, say that this was 100,000, right? Or let's say that this was, so this is 27,500. We'll just use its number. We know that we can't be doing this then in tens of thousands because then we'd have 90,000 just from this one, right? So this can't be anything above tens of thousands. So we can get rid of D. we know that A is going to be too small, because if we're doing it in tens and our largest one is a 9, we're only going to have 90 and we need something in the 27,000s. Then we have it in hundreds. We only have 5 cities, so if our largest one had 900, then that's not going to get us to 27,500. So we know it has to be in thousands, right? So that's how we're going to approach that one. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we can get rid of things as quickly as we can with those. So tips for that one, once again, we made sure we paid attention to axes and units, and then we were asked to provide units. So we went ahead and we got rid of answer choices that were too big, then we got rid of answer choices that were too small to find what the accurate answer choice is. So that's what I would recommend there. All right, so for number 8, we've got for what value of n is the absolute value n minus 1 plus 1 equal to 0. I immediately know that there's no such value of n. How did I do that so quickly? Well, I'll show you. Absolute value. Put this in your notes. Absolute value, right? These little lines going vertical, and n minus 1 means that it can equal 0, but it has to be greater than or equal 0, right? So it can be 0, but it's got to equal greater than or equal to 0. So if we're adding 1 to our minimum of 0, we're never going to equal 0, right? We're always going to be 1 or greater. So there's no such value of n. So make sure you put that any number minus 1 or any number. Go ahead and put this instead. Put any number in absolute value has to be greater than or equal to 0. So that should go in your notes. So the tricks to these absolute value questions are just making sure we understand that if we're doing anything with these, right, any sort of signs like these, or equals, or doesn't equal, just make sure we're understanding that absolute value can never be negative. If you understand that absolute value can never be negative, a lot of times that'll help you find your right answer pretty quickly. All right, so that's going to take us through 1 through 8 of our math with calculator and our math without calculator sections. So that'll be it for the math sections today. So make sure that you pay attention to your math sections tomorrow for day 7. And let's go ahead and switch over to the SAT writing section for today. All right, welcome to the writing section for day 6 of 50 in our SAT preparation series. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a review of what we learned last time, and then we're going to get into what we're learning today. So what we talked about last time was context. We talked about how context is everything with the SAT writing section, and how that means that you have to read the passage. Now that doesn't mean that you read it the same way that you do for the reading section. It means that you have to read a little bit differently. So what we talked about is that the words in the writing passage, because sometimes in the writing passage you'll have to decide what words should be placed instead of different words based on the context of the passage. So in order to do that, that means you had to read the passage. We discussed that. We discussed how this reading changes from the way you do the reading section. We talked about how you have to pay attention to verbs, right? So you need to pay attention to verbs, their tenses and their endings. So you want to pay attention to verb endings for parallelism, which we'll get into as well. We talked about how you have to pay attention to the numbers, right? We need our subject numbers to match our verb numbers. We have to pay attention to our tense, right? We need to maintain tense throughout the passage. We only switch tenses when we need to, which is pretty rare. So we want to make sure we're maintaining tense throughout the passage. In order to pick up on tense, we have to read the passage. We want to make sure we're paying attention to our subjects, right? So we need to pay attention to the number of our subjects so we can match it to the number of our verbs. And then we talked about parallelism, which I'm going to get into in a minute here. So we got to make sure we pay attention to tone, because we want to make sure we're maintaining tone throughout the writing section. So if we're reading a passage, we want to make sure we pick up on tone, so that way when we're asked to fill in a word somewhere, we can do so. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to paragraph structure, because we will be asked to switch the order of sentences sometimes in the SAT writing section. And when you're asked to do that, you need to understand that we go from claim, evidence to explanation, right? So we want to make sure we're able to do that. We want to make sure we pay attention to the flow of ideas, because there are times we have to insert a transition word and we need to know which transition word should go in. There's times where we have to say something is similar or different or contrast it. So we need to make sure that we understand the flow of ideas there as well. So understanding the flow of ideas is very important. All right, so we had some examples. So we talked about question types. So we had the question types of related or similar words, right? So our example was with entertained. I'm going to erase a little bit of my writing here so you can see that a bit better, right? So we had, well, John has entertained the idea of imposing a speed limit of 33 miles per hour. He has not considered the increased traffic that will cause. And I talked about how if we're given this, right, it would help if we had more context, but we can still answer without context. But obviously we'd want to read and make sure we had context around it, right? So how did I determine that the correct answer was indeed proposed, right? The answer choice was B. How did I understand that that was correct? Well, the first thing I did is I saw has here, which indicated to me that I have to have a past tense verb here. So I got rid of anything that was present tense. So I got rid of entertain, I got rid of sustain, so C and A I got rid of, and I could get rid of nothing else, right? Because everything else was in the past tense. So then I was looking at the rest of the context of the sentence, right? So I have well John has, and then whatever goes there. The idea of imposing a speed limit of 33 miles per hour, he has not considered the increased traffic that will cause. Well, this is a refutation right here, right? We're refuting what John is advocating, right? Or what he's supporting. So here's how I know that it isn't argued and that I know it isn't suggested or entertained. How do I know it's proposed? Well, if John had just entertained this idea, then they wouldn't be refuting it, right? Because if he's just entertaining it, then it doesn't really matter. But if he's proposing it, then they would be refuting it because then it really matters, right? He proposed it, they have to reject it. So here's why they're going to reject it, because he hasn't considered the increased traffic it will cause. So that's how I can get rid of argued, that's how I can get rid of entertained, and that's how I can get rid of suggested, because those aren't powerful enough to cause a refutation or a rebuttal in his argument. All right. Next, we talk about homophones, right? So I talked about the difference in theirs and the difference in its and then and then in effect. So I'll quick run over that. So we've got its versus its. So this its right here is it is, right? When there's that apostrophe takes the place of that I, right? So that would be it is. Its, like this, with no apostrophe, is singular and possessive. We talked about than versus than, right? So we have then with an E, that's indicating a sequence, right? So something happens after something else, whereas than with an A is used to compare two things, right? So something is warmer than something else. We talked about the difference between theirs. So this first there, that would be there as in a possessive, right? So a plural possessive. So it could be their bikes are red, right? They have multiple bikes and they are red. We have they are, right? So there with that apostrophe and that RE. So that means they are. So we're just abbreviating it for they are. Next we have there, right? So that would be something like over there, right? Something with place. Or there is 100 people in the building. Or there are, I'm sorry, it should be there are 100 people in the building, right? I just didn't match my number there, right? It should be there are 100 people in the building because each of those is plural. Are is plural and there is plural. Or 100 people. So, all right. Now we've got parallelism. So parallelism, I talked about how this should be quick points, easy points. It should be your best friend with the SAT writing section. So I explained that we have to have parallelism in our verb tenses. That's usually the most often form that parallelism shows up on the SAT writing section, in my opinion, is through verb tenses, so matching the tenses of verbs. We can also have to pay attention to the order of nouns when we can, adjectives, verbs. We want them all to remain the same or parallel, right? So noun phrases have to be parallel. So we talked about how in our examples we have Haley likes to run, jump, and swim. We have all these verbs. They all have the same tense, right? The same endings. Then we have Haley enjoys running, jumping, and swimming. We see we match tense with those ing verbs, so we want to make sure we're doing that. Next we had Jason likes riding his bike, reading his book, and driving his car. We wouldn't want to say Jason likes riding his bike, reading his book, and driving his red car necessarily, because even though we're being more descriptive there, we're adding an adjective and we're breaking that parallelism, right? So we want to maintain that parallelism. Now, what if we said Jason likes riding his blue bike, reading his yellow book, and driving his car? Well, then we would want to add that adjective in because we had those adjectives in our first two noun phrases. So we want to pay attention to parallelism because that can help us get easy points, right? And then I explained that big sentence there and how they matched everything up there. I'm not going to do that right now because it's just a review, and that was a pretty heavy example there. So, like I said, we want to look for series, lists, etc. to find parallelism questions. Make sure that any answer choices that contain a list, watch out for a parallelism question there. So make sure you go back and look for context and check for parallelism. So any lists, including verbs especially, you need to make sure that you're paying attention to parallelism on those, because if it's a list including verbs, it's probably a parallelism question. All right, so now we can get into today's lesson. Today's lesson isn't going to be super long, so we shouldn't go over an hour today in total. So we've got correlative conjunctions. So correlative conjunctions, what are they? Well, they're used to connect words that are equally important to a sentence's meaning, right? So you'll probably from my experience in high school English classes, a lot of times you're not really taught grammar stuff, so you might not understand like some of the stuff like correlative conjunctions until you see examples, which is why I put examples in. So we're going to go ahead and look at an example, and you'll probably pick up on it pretty quickly if you're a native speaker. If not, it could be good to Google correlative conjunctions and look those over if you're from a different country. All right, so our examples, we have the car I bought was both fast and small. So what are our correlative conjunctions here? Our correlative conjunctions are both and, right? We have two things. So we have one and the other. We have they're both fast and small. So we have our correlative conjunctions list. That's going to be stuff right here, right? And I'll get to that in 1 minute after I get through my other example. We have you can either play basketball or play baseball. So our two correlative conjunctions here are either or. So you see how it's kind of connecting two ideas that are equally important to the sentence, right? We have playing baseball is equally important to playing basketball, right? We have being fast is equally important to being small here as far as we're concerned. So that's what a correlative conjunction is and how it's used in sentences. So let's go over a few examples here. Now, if you're a non-native speaker, I would also recommend that you Google correlative conjunctions and look over a more expansive list. These here that I've included, in my opinion, are the ones that are more likely to show up on the SAT writing section, in my opinion. So I'd make sure that you understand these especially, but if you're a non-native speaker and you're shooting for a high score, I would also recommend that you Google a list and look over some more of those examples in pairs. But these are, in my opinion, the main ones you should know. So main ones you should know. Yeah, it's kind of ironic that I'm doing an SAT reading section and I just used a letter U instead of the word U. So I'm going to fix that. These are the main ones you should know, in my opinion. All right, so let's go over them. So like I just said, we have both and, that's a common one. We have either and or. We have just as and so. So an example of that one would be, just as I ran a marathon, so I got tired. That would be an example. Or we have neither nor, right? So that would be the opposite of our either or, right? Would be neither nor. So we want to know that one as well. Not only this, but also, and then something else, right? So not only did I get tired from running a marathon, but also I grew even more hungry. So that's an example there. We have at once and then and, right? So we're talking about something happening at once and something else happening later. We have no sooner and than. That's our next one for correlative conjunctions, no sooner and than. We have if then, or I'm sorry, if then, not if than. We have if then, right? So if I was to drop my calculator, then it might break, right? So that would be an example of that in a sentence. Next up, we have rather and than. So an example of that in a sentence would be, rather, okay, I got a good one. All right, so I would rather drop my calculator on a pillow than drop my calculator on concrete. So that would be an example of rather than for that one. Right, now keep in mind, look at how homophones show up on the SAT writing section, right? We have then and than. A really good question for the SAT writing section, in my opinion, would be then something where we have a use of correlative conjunctions, and you also have to pick the difference between then and than, right? So you see how it's important that all of these ideas connect like that? That's how the SAT writing section, a lot of the harder questions are ones that test two concepts at once. So understanding how they connect is very important here. All right, now we got being concise, right? This is a big thing that they test on the SAT writing section. I'm going to star it 3 times because it's huge. And it should be easy points because you should be able to recognize this. So this is, in my opinion, should be easy points, and I'm going to make sure I teach it to you because it's very important. And when we start doing practice problems, you're going to see how easy it gets once you start to recognize patterns and setups for it. So this should be very helpful to you once we start getting to those practice problems. So we've got being concise. We want to make sure that we're avoiding unnecessary repetition. We want to avoid redundancy as well. If you've watched any of my SAT writing answer explanations for the practice tests, you'll hear me say the 2 big things we want to avoid on the SAT writing section are repetition and redundancy. I say that all the time because those questions show up a lot, and if we can avoid repetition and redundancy, we're going to get a lot of answers correct. So what does being concise means? Well, that means using as few words as possible to get across the same message, right, while maintaining that meaning. So if you have done practice tests for the SAT writing section, another thing that you'll notice is a lot of the correct answers when you have multiple sentences in each answer choice are the ones that have less words. So that doesn't mean that that's an end-all be-all. Sometimes the correct answer is the one with a medium amount of words, but a lot of times it's about, like I said, not repeating things and not being redundant, which means you're going to use less words. So all right, so what does this mean? This means we're not going to repeat information that's already been said. So if something has been said earlier in the passage, we're not going to repeat that because we don't want to be redundant, right? If we're repeating information that's already been said, then we're being redundant, which means we're breaking both our repetition rule and our redundancy rule. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. Next, we want to use modifiers to avoid repeating the same word twice. So what would this mean, right? This would mean something like, let's say we had the men were very strong. Right, the men were strong. We'll just do the men were strong. All right, the men were strong, and then let's say that we had our next sentence was the men worked on the railroad. Worked on the railroad. Right, so let's say that we were trying to be more concise here, right? What we would say then is we would take this adjective, put it in front of men, and have the strong men worked on the railroad, right? So we could get rid of this. Another thing that'll show up a lot, and that example that I just gave, it probably isn't as strong of an example as I can come up with, so I'll try to give a better one. A lot of times what I see for avoiding repetition is I'll see something end a sentence and something start it, so we're repeating two things. For example, you might end with the fisherman, right? So I'll try to get this going. So you might see a sentence end with the fisherman. So we'll say the fisherman, right? You'll see that end a sentence, and you'll see the next sentence start with the fisherman. You want to avoid that big time. If you see that, that should be a big red flag in telling you that you can combine those two ideas. You'll see that this will probably be underlined, or this will be underlined, or they'll both be underlined, and you'll ask to connect the sentences. A lot of times that's what it'll be, is they'll connect, like this underline will extend out to that, and you have to connect the sentences. So anytime you see the end of a sentence and the start of a sentence are the same words, that should be a big red flag that you need to change something to get rid of repetition and redundancy. So that's huge. Anytime you see that anything like that, then you know you're probably doing a repetition and redundancy question. All right, so let's get back to the notes. All right, so that was about modifiers, right? So you can also see that with non-essential phrases. So you'll have one sentence that contains a phrase describing something, and the next sentence involves that something. A lot of times you can take the information that describes it and put it in as a non-essential modifier to that thing it was describing to get rid of to combine those two sentences, because that's another question type that's on the SAT writing section, is combining two sentences into one. So that's one way you can do that, is if one's describing an object or a person or a group of people, is you can use that non-essential modifier next to that group of people. Keep in mind the modifier has to be next to what it's modifying, and that's one way you can combine those, so pay attention to that. All right, so do not be redundant. So that's just like not being repetitive, right? If we have already said something before, we don't want to rephrase it and have it mean the same thing, right? So let's say that previously I said the letter B is similar to the letter J. Now, that is probably not true, but let's say I said that. Let's say the letter B is similar to the letter J. If I said that earlier, I don't want to then say the letter J is similar to the letter B, because then I'm being redundant. I just said that. Now, am I being repetitive? Well, I mean, someone might say no, because you switched the letters B and J, but we're being redundant, right? So really, repetition and redundancy, they're kind of the same thing. If you want to get technical, then not totally the same thing, but basically don't be redundant, right? Don't be a wise, you know what, just kind of pay attention, make sure we're avoiding redundancy and avoiding repetition. Make sure that we're also using good diction and being precise in our word choice, right? We want to use word choices that are accurate to what we're describing. So make sure that we're not spending, say, like 6 words to describe something that could be described in 2 words or 1 word. We want to use as few words as possible and as precise words as possible. All right, next up we've got idioms. So idioms, what are idioms? So idioms are basically standard English expressions, right? So how would we normally say things? So idioms, my big tip for idioms, and I would write this down as well, is if you are a native English speaker or you are very, very fluent in English, right? You speak it similar to how an American would, or really similar to how an American would is what I would say. I mean, I'm not very familiar with the differences between British speaking English and American speaking English, but I would say definitely if you're American speaking English, basically think about what you would say, right? That'll probably be the answer, is what you would naturally say. If you're British speaking English on the SAT, I mean, I think you'd probably be fine doing what you would say. There might be a couple things where you guys say things a little bit differently. I know that there are a few things, but I would say as a general rule, if you're stuck, right, and you're not sure what an American would say, just say what you would say in Britain or wherever you are in the UK or anything like that. So, but if you're English, or if you're a Native American speaker, not Native American, but if you're native to America, you're very familiar and fluent with the English language, should be good doing what you would just normally say, right? So a lot of times idioms show up when a preposition, infinitive, or gerund is underlined. Now you may not know what these are, and you don't necessarily need to. You'll get familiar with it with practice questions, right? Really, practice questions are where you're going to really start to pick up on patterns. When you do that, that's when you're going to see big results, but you do need to know this introductory information to know what to look for. So if you see a preposition, infinitive, or gerund and it's underlined, then that's probably an idiom question. So if you know what those are, that's great. If not, you'll pick up on it later when we go through practice tests. Basically, it's a standard English expression question. So just asking what you would normally say if you were in a conversation with someone. So think about what you'd say naturally. If you're a non-native speaker though, so say that you're someone who isn't from America, or you don't speak English fluently, right? You didn't grow up around people who spoke English, I would recommend searching common SAT idioms on Google and studying them. So down here I write all the SAT idioms you need in quotation marks. Prep Scholar has an article out that's titled all the SAT idioms you need. So if you want to go take a look at that, even if you are a native English speaker, I would recommend taking a look at that article for about 5 minutes, just looking through the examples. You don't really have to read through the paragraphs that they say, in my opinion. I would just go take a look at the examples, make sure you're comfortable with them. You'll probably be comfortable with most of them. If you're a non-native speaker though, I would take more, like I would probably spend half an hour studying those if you're not familiar with them. So if you go through and you're struggling, I would make sure that you understand at least most of those. So if you're an English speaker and you spoke it all your life and you're really fluent, you're probably fine. Don't necessarily need to look at it. I'd still recommend looking over it for 5 minutes, but if you don't want to, it's probably not a big deal. So here are some from practice tests, some common SAT idioms that showed up on practice tests. You had wait for, serve as a means of, and in order to be. So you see that these are really just kind of like ways of connecting ideas that we say in the modern English language. So if you've spoken English and you're really good at it, then you'll probably be fine with idioms, but it's always good to get more practice. So I'll even probably end this lesson like 5 minutes early to give you time to go look up all the SAT idioms you need from Prep Scholar. It's their article. Go take a look at it. I wouldn't even read through the paragraphs. I would just skip down to the examples and familiarize yourself with them. So I'll finish this one up pretty quick here so you can go do that. Another example would be regard as, worry about, and advise against, right? So you see that these are just kind of common things, right, that we would say. So you have words like as, about, and against, right? Those are the things that are going to indicate to you that it's an idiom question, right? Anything to be, of, serve as, right, as a means of, for, of really isn't that one. I shouldn't have circled that. It's on me. It should have been for, as, to be, as, about, against. Words like that are going to indicate to you that it's an idiom question. So those are signs that you're dealing with an idiom question. So I'll go ahead and end it now so you can go ahead and look up all the SAT idioms you need from Prep Scholar, that article. Go through those examples for 5 minutes, and I'm going to end it here. So make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Stay tuned. Come back tomorrow for day 7 of 90 from our SAT prep series. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share. If you can donate, we'd really appreciate it. The link will be in the description when the donation link is up. Thanks for watching and have a great day.